got a lot of great discussion that we're going to have here this morning, and I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics. But before we do that, I do want to recognize some of the folks that are making this event possible. And in that context, our thanks to this morning's breakfast sponsor, GLC Minerals, and refreshment sponsor, Crave Brothers Farmstead Cheese. Please join me in thanking them. And as we do have some folks continuing to file in, I'm going to go ahead and make myself scarce and introduce some folks that are going to be bringing some comments that I think you're going to find very interesting. I've heard some of these, some of these points before in some separate conferences that I've attended, and every time that I hear this presentation that we're about to hear, I pick up something different. And so I hope that you all have the opportunity to really take in this information here this morning as well. Before we hear from our keynote speaker, I want to introduce this morning's sponsor, Larry Meyer of MWI Animal Health and Microtechnologies, to introduce our keynote speaker. Larry?
On behalf of MWI Animal Health and Microtechnologies, it is my pleasure today to introduce our first speaker of the morning, Scott Caine. Aimpoint Research is a global strategic intelligence firm specializing in agri-food, and as president of Aimpoint Research, Scott leads the organization in its mission to empower intelligence-driven organizations and give clients a competitive advantage. He's responsible for successfully achieving organizational goals, including superior intelligence and operational excellence. Scott is a tenured leader with more than 25 years of organizational leadership experience. He has served in organizations ranging from the U.S. Army to small boutique data warehousing consulting firms and large enterprises with diverse roles including marketing, operation, business systems, and sales. Through these experiences, he has honed and gained a diverse set of skills, including strategic and sector operations, marketing research, competitive intelligence, enterprise planning and organizational development, business modeling and strategy, product development and delivery, and strategic business sales. Please help me to welcome Scott Caine.
It's always a lot of words. Thank you. Appreciate it. The intangible becomes tangible when presented with information. The intangible becomes real when we consider things. The intangible becomes rational when we spend time having conversations that take us out of our common conversations, when we take the time to actually consider what else the world offers. As a military intelligence officer, my job was to make sure that my commanders understood what was happening presently and over the horizon. What it meant is that I needed to make sure that they were aware of not only what was tangible, but what was intangible. It was my responsibility to make sure that they understood that that was real, not perceived, and that that real meant that they needed to do something. What it means, can you make sure the clicker is clicking? What it means for us is that today I am your intelligence officer. I intend to provide you with a sense of where we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. So let me just start with once over the world. The world is a complicated place right now. We like to look at the world and say there are archetypes, and those archetypes give us indications as to what's actually happening in the world. So rather than talking about Russia, let's talk about Putin as the disruptor. Rather than talking about China, let's talk about Xi as the ever-changing presence and influencer in the world. Rather than talking about Brazil generically, let's talk about them as the up-and-comer. Rather than talking about Ukraine, let's talk about them as the defender of independence. And when we do that, what we actually spend time talking about is why this matters. And why it matters to us is that our inputs, and in some cases our exports, go to, through, or from these countries. What we also have to recognize is that the men and women who lead these countries don't necessarily see this as a zero-sum gain. What they do see it as is protecting my own. The world is a complicated place. If you're not familiar with what BRICS are, BRIC is Brazil, Russia, India, China. Just a month ago or so, 6 more organizations joined the BRICS. Why do I bring that up? Because the vast majority of our inputs come from the BRICS, with China being the main one. China is building a Belt and Road Initiative that is impacting not only us, but it's impacting the world, making the intangible tangible. What we have to recognize is that what's happening in the Middle East is not just a regional conflict. It is getting worse, but it also impacts the world in lots of ways. What we know is the distribution of supplies goes through the Suez. What we know is that going around the Horn of Africa is hard. What we know is that this is a complicated situation. Your situation rep this morning is trying to make sure you understand that the intangible becomes tangible, that politics and economics, that the world is actually local. If we're not connecting what's happening on a farm in Russia with what's happening on our dairy farms in Wisconsin, then we're failing to recognize that what appears intangible for us is actually very tangible. It is very real, and it is something that we have to have conversations about. We need to open our aperture to make sure that what we're doing is having the conversations that are complete and full, because we're not just under pressure here in the United States from our own issues. The world is impacting us, and we frankly impact the world. My organization spends an awful lot of time thinking about this. My organization believes that food is part of our national power structure. We believe in national security. I myself was in the military as a military intelligence officer. All of my key leaders were military officers, many of them spending 20 or 30 years in the United States military. What you don't know about the military is it's not about fighting conflicts all the time. In many cases, it is about the diplomatic, economic, and political struggles that are going on between nations, between armies, and between peoples. So we spend a lot of time thinking about this, and we believe fundamentally that food security, not the availability of food necessarily, but how we produce food in the United States is in fact a national security concern. That we ought to be spending time making sure that what we have is a resilient economy, that what we're doing is creating the opportunities for survival. And in order to do that, we spend time thinking about a lot of different aspects of that. And then we come up with ideas like this, American food power. We as a country have been blessed by navigable waterways, beautiful, productive land, skilled individuals who are willing to dedicate their lives to the production of food. And moreover, we've been protected in a way by the borders of our country, which are surrounded by oceans, except to the north and south, in a way that's allowed us to become very good at taking care of ourselves. And as a consequence, it's meant good things to the world, and it's meant good things to us. Our infrastructure is not sustaining that. Our farms are not going to continue to operate the way they are and continue to be resilient. We need to be discussing what it means to continue to advance our mission. We need to be progressive in our conversations. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about national security. We're going to talk about farmers of the future, and we're going to talk about risk mitigation. And the reason we feel qualified to do this is we spend a lot of time thinking and talking to people, and we've been in front of Congress before, about what the world looks like. And it starts with consumers, and yes, consumers do influence what we're talking about, and it goes all the way to the farm gate. It means that we've got to continue to be asking questions about why, what, and how. And so as an organization, we've spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to serve the agricultural industry. And what we're going to talk about today is what we call farmer of the future. And then we're going to talk about risk mitigation. And that risk mitigation is going to get us into making sure that the intangible becomes tangible. And what you're going to find is that as we look at what happens on the farm, much of it is actually tangible. It is tactical. It is not always strategic. And we need to be helping manage that forward. We need to be having those conversations, and Farm of the Future is going to help us know who and how and what. Now, this isn't just about national security. This is also a passion of ours. There's no other industry in the United States that has multi-generational operations like agriculture. There's no business, legal, that passes down generational wealth in the way that agriculture has. And so most of the men and women who we have the honor of meeting with believe in this succession, believe that it is their dream to pass it down. And I need to stop and say thank you for your service, because as much as you might say that the military serves the nation, that what's happening, they serve the nation, I would say every one of you serves the national interest as well. You are part of our national security infrastructure. And the reason that's important is because success, and frankly succession, is not guaranteed. We know that 80% of the men and women that we speak to across the United States say that I want to pass this operation on to the next generation. But less than 30% make it to the second generation, and less than 12% make it to the third generation, and less than 3% make it to the fourth generation. And that doesn't mean that the farm had to start in 1862. There are farms and operations starting today. Will they have the skills, the talent, the resources, and the tools that help them make sure they can pass it on? I think it's incumbent on us to think about that, enable that to happen, and actually to be part of that solution. So what we're really talking about is enabling the industry to continue to thrive, to enable it to have resiliency, to enable it to understand itself better, and to make sure that it's not making assumptions based on what we know. What we understand when we go out on farms, and we do it a lot, is that many men and women think that everybody operates exactly the same way they do. And when we look at agriculture, many think of us the exact same way. A dairy farm is a dairy farm is a dairy farm, and therefore they're all exactly the same. And I won't ask you by a show of hands, but I assume that you are with me when I say that can't possibly and is not the truth. We have to spend time thinking about this, because over the past 5 years, things have happened in a way that we did not expect. I won't call these, are you familiar with the term black swan events? These are events that aren't supposed to happen. They're supposed to be unusual. They're supposed to happen infrequently, and yet over the past 5 years, I would say we've had more than 3 black swan events. The world was impacted by COVID. Trade was challenged. We had disruption in the marketplaces. We've had changes in the way things have moved around. We've had political shifts around the world that have changed countries from being open to closed. We have seen alliances like BRIC transform, even though they've been around for 30 years. We wanted to understand our farmers better. We wanted to understand what all of this meant. And so 6 years ago, we did a segmentation, and that segmentation was called Farm of the Future. And we said, in 40 years, this is what the world's going to look like. Guess what? It took 5 years for many of those things to come to fruition. And what we're going to talk about today is what we learned in those 5 years. And that's what we call Farm of the Future 2.0. Much of this is about taking the intangible and making it tangible. Now, there are 4 truths that we had coming out of the first Farm of the Future. The first is that farms and farmers are not homogeneous. They're not all the same. But the lifestyle is foundational to every man and woman we've spoken to. This is part of who you are. It is your DNA. And for about 1 in 5 operations, it's the only thing. It's where they make their decisions. It's how they operate. It's how they think. For another 40%, it's actually about being a professional. The profession of farming is something that, on top of lifestyle, is something that they live for. It is about their practices. And then for another 40%, and yes, that does add up to 100%, I'm running a business. I'm running a business, and that business matters. It doesn't mean that I don't recognize the lifestyle. It doesn't mean that I don't believe in the business processes, but it means that the language that I use, the tonality that I use, the partners that I keep are business-oriented. Now, what I hope each of you are doing right now is saying, does this make sense? Is this reasonable? And is this rational? And if you're not, I'm going to ask you to think a little more, because we know that farms are not homogeneous. We also know that farmers are not homogeneous. Now, there are some men and women, maybe even in this room, who their grandfather farmed in a very specific way, and they're doing it exactly the same way right now. How many of you are farming exactly the same way your great-grandfather farmed? Probably not. How many of you have children who are coming behind you and they're going to farm exactly the same way you're going to farm? Probably not. Different things change, different solutions come to the table, different activities transform the environment. And what we're talking about now is making sure that those men and women who are inside and outside of the agri-food value chain, understand that farmers are also not homogenous. This happens to be the Burkhart family. Now, they could have passed on generationally their habits and practices, but they didn't. Robert Sr. in the picture is very, very independent. He made it on his own. He was a second-generation farmer, but he knows how he runs his operation. He doesn't need collaboration because he knows what worked for him. He has struggled through the 80s, he has struggled through the 90s, and he has maintained a sustainable operation. His son, Robert Jr., saw his father doing that and didn't want to do it the same. His role, his focus, his intent is stability and security, which is different than his father's. His father, he wanted independence and still retains that independence, but Robert Jr. says, no, this is about making sure that I have something to pass on to the next generation. His son and his son's wife and their daughter Emily both went to UW-Madison, came back to the farm and said, we're not going to do it the way we always did it. What we need to do is think about these other things. We want to advance the farm. We want to innovate. We want to bring other partners to the table. We want to continue to create an environment where our daughter actually wants to continue this operation. Each of them have been, in their own rights, successful. Each of them see the tangible and the intangible. Each of them understand the real world that they are exposed to, but each of them approach decision-making differently, which is why we do psychographic segmentation. Because it's not about farms are the same. It's not about behavior indicates something. It's about how people make decisions. And what I want to spend time talking about is how we see people making decisions right now, and it's going to help you. Let me start with this. Beyond the Bernhardt farm, what we've learned, and this is the fourth of the truths that we have, is that size really does not matter. Let me say that differently. The farm on the left-hand side, the Everett farm, has about 450 head of cattle. They have an automated parlor. I spent about a day and a half with them. They are, in of themselves, advancing from where the father broke away from his brother. Had a bad situation, started his own farm, and actually has grown to about 450 head. Fully automated parlor because his son's wife know how to run the machine. And she is the daily operator. His son is the daily manager, and he is, by all accounts, the decision maker. But when we talk to him, he says, I don't actually make decisions. I'm the decider, but my son advises me, counsels me, and educates me on what the right decisions are. They are successful, and they will grow. If you move to the right-hand side, has anyone ever heard of MVP farms? I see a couple heads shaking your head, north and south. Look, MVP Farms in 2020 was the Innovative Dairy of the Year, elected as such. They are a joint operation between two different dairy operations, one in Kansas, one in Ohio. They have a fully automated parlor. They have moved all the way along the path of full traceability and transparency. They are specifically going out of their way to market themselves as a leader in the dairy industry. Both of these operations are successful. If you ask me to bet on both of them, I would bet that they're both going to succeed for very different reasons. Size does not matter as much as what's happening between the ears of these men and women. And what we need to be careful of is making sure we're talking to the right people, not just the decider, but in some cases, the people who are influencing those decisions. Now, why does this matter to you? Why this matters to you is because we're spending time learning how to interact with individuals and not treating people homogeneously. The worst type of business is the business that says, I've got a solution and I'm going to sell it exactly the same way. And I know every one of you has had someone try to present to you a solution that didn't matter because they weren't meeting you where you are. So let's talk a little bit about what we think we've found with this psychographic segmentation. Let me introduce you to the segments, and let me start with this. Don't try to put yourself in a bucket. Don't try to find yourself in this, because no one falls into just one category. These are dispositional. This is situational. This is something that we believe helps us inform decision making. So let's start with the ambitious architects. These are the men and women who you know, maybe yourself, who are the most innovative. They are early adopters. What they're looking for is growth based on innovation. They are looking to change, sometimes just to be different. They are on the far left-hand side because they are the most business-oriented, the least lifestyle-oriented, the most operationally focused on innovation and change. To their immediate right, we call them confident tacticianers, men and women who are extremely independent. extremely confident, extremely growth-oriented, are looking to embrace technology, are looking to find partners, but at the end of the day, they know what they know. And they want the partners to provide them with information, not collaborate on that decision-making. Are you beginning to feel you have images of in your mind of men and women who fall into these categories? Let's take another step to the right, to our connected stalwarts. Connected stalwarts makes up the largest portion, nearly 36% of the farmer universe. We did this across the country. And our connected stalwarts are much more about safety and security. They are driven by stability, and they are really looking to partner to understand what they don't know. Are you beginning to see sunlight between these individuals? From deeply business-oriented to deeply independent to deeply concerned about stability and structure. You might remember the Bernhardt family, because the father is every bit of a Lone Ranger. I can do it on my own. I've done it on my own. I don't need anybody else. I'm going to continue to operate the way I need to operate, and it's not bad. I still want to grow, but I want to grow my way. I don't want to grow your way. I don't want you to help me. What I actually want to do is continue to keep it the same as much as I can, because it's worked for me in the past, and I branched out from that. They're not seeking help because they know what they're doing. And that's not a bad thing. There's no winners or losers in this. This is just a change in the conversation. This is about making the intangible tangible. This is about understanding when someone uses words, the words they're using may not be consistent with how you view the world. And that leads us to resolute defenders. Resolute defenders are the most lifestyle-oriented. Yes, they do want to grow. Yes, they are about the practices on their farm, but they believe that what they're doing is their mission. It is about how they were raised. They are looking to make sure that they prioritize what I know is right, and by God, it's the way it's going to be done going forward. And these men and women are extremely resistant to change, because change threatens what they know to be right. And I'm going to go into more detail on all of these. We bring this up because within dairy, we don't see the same distribution as we see across the full industry. So I should do this. I'll go back, so perhaps you didn't cheat. If you cheated, don't raise your hand. Of these 5 segments, what do we believe the average dairy operation falls into? How is their decision-making demonstrated on this chart? Anybody want to volunteer an answer? Super independent, super go it alone, super collaborative. Which one do you think most of your operations fall into? I will tell you that most of America that we talk to think that dairy farmers are 100% resolute defenders. 100%, every one of them. Is that fair? Resolute defenders. It's all about my lifestyle. Don't tell me to change. Don't ask me to move forward. Is that fair? No, it's completely unfair, because that's not the case. So let's actually go and look at this. It's the one that's highlighted in the red. And what you're going to see from a distance is that same spectrum, except it's been reversed in the chart. So from the top, it's from the right-hand side down. So about 1 in 8 dairy men and women we speak to right now, this is a national study, fall into the category of resolute defenders. They actually are about the same as every other commodity we look at. And by the way, commodities haven't been in the past something that looked different. And we actually see there is a difference. And here's the one that I want to call out. If you go to the not light blue, but kind of darker blue one, those are, in fact, our confident tacticians. Those men and women who are independent. I want to call attention to you because odds are 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 2 of the men and women you're dealing with in progressive operations fall into this category. Yes, business-oriented. Yes, independent. Yes, want to collaborate. Yes, want technology. But I want to do it at my own pace. Don't force me to change. I will do it when I'm ready. Does that sound familiar to you? My farmer interviews have suggested that's mostly the case. When I go out and talk to dairy men and women across the country, I find that many of them find when they're put in a position where they may need to make decisions, that's where they land. And that's not bad or good, it just is. What we have to understand equally so, and you know this better than I do, that dairies, more than any other commodity, are almost exclusively earning their family's income from that operation. more so than others. We see lots other blended incomes coming from other commodity groups. What we also see is that the dedication to this is even deeper because the commitment runs multi-generations, even more than we see in other commodities. What we also see unusually within the dairy operations is they are more aware of global markets, genetics, and sustainability than any other commodity group. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, because we don't really spend that much time exporting our products in whole form, broken form, or converted form overseas. But yet, the conversation seems to be happening within the dairy industry. And what I would suggest to you is it's because the dairy industry in itself is aware of these intangibles and how they come all the way down and affect your marketplace, your operation. Does that feel fair? Am I telling anybody anything you haven't otherwise felt or heard? What I'm hoping is that maybe some of these intangibles, the things that you may not have had words for, are becoming more tangible. Let's spend a little time talking about these confident tactitioners. The first slide is going to be a general overview. The second slide is how we should engage these men and women. Again, confident tactitioners, very, very oriented towards the tradition, not the lifestyle, the tradition of what we do and doing it well. They do seek growth and are often aggressive towards that growth. That growth is not dependent on anyone else. I'm going to do it. I'm capable of driving this. I'm capable of moving this forward. I have the power. I have the resources, except they don't. I am confident in my decision making, except they aren't always. These are the men and women who make up the majority of the dairy industry, and we love the confident tactitioners. These men and women want to be respected for their independence. They want to be led when they ask to be led. They also want to make sure that the relationships they have are founded in trust, and that trust is earned and lost just as easily. Trust isn't a word that the other categories have as strong an indication towards. And I think it's important that we spend time talking about that, because if they in fact trust you, they are buying and engaging with you because they see value in the relationship, in what you deliver as an organization, as a person or otherwise, and that is hyper true of this group. It is not about price. It's about what I get for that. It's not about cost. It's about the relationship. Confident tactitioners want to be empowered, which is different than what we see with connected stalwarts. Remember, center of the graph, connected stalwarts, looking at not necessarily the tradition of farming, but struggling to know, yes, sir? That's a great question, and the answer is it's all farmers, not dairy. So let me just go back really quickly again, and let me remind you of those numbers, and I appreciate that. And folks, look, ask me questions. I'm going to be able to answer those. So remember, for us, the confident tactitioners, it's the second one up from the bottom, about 31%. About 31%. The next largest is the connected stalwarts at 25%, about 1 in 4. The next largest is and we're going to go over that in a second, ambitious architects, 1 in 5. Then you have the resolute defenders, about 1 in 8. And then less than 1 in 10 fall into the category of lone rangers. And I want to talk about lone rangers because I think all of you think you're lone rangers, but you're not. And I'll tell you why in a second. Okay? Thank you for that question. So, confident tactitioners, we've spoken about those. We've spoken a little bit about connected stalwarts. These men and women do want to partner. They're seeking partnership. They're seeking input. They're seeking collaboration. They're seeking to know more because they admit they don't know enough. However, they're going to be the slowest to move because they're going to need time to digest that information. Do you see the difference between those two groups? It's the same responsibility. It's the same information, but delivered in two very different ways. We need to have patience with our connected stalwarts. They're ruminating, they're thinking about it, they're spending time. They are ready to contradict themselves if, in fact, what they thought was right is no longer right, which is not true of the previous group. They're going to be really hard to get to change their opinion. They might not admit it, but they're going to come back to you and change the way that they're interacting with you. Now, a lot of your commodity peers will tell you that their most favorite group is this group. Why? Because they are innovative, they are advancing their business models, they are looking towards the future. Failure isn't going to prevent them from moving forward. They are, in fact, going to transform agriculture, which is great. Except that sometimes failure is a setback. And sometimes rushing to do things and being business-minded loses some of the other people around you as you're making those decisions. Ambitious architects are strong men and women. They are business-oriented. They're sometimes the largest operations that are out in the country, including dairies. They are ones who will probably speak to you in the language of business, and they're going to want you to respond in the language of business. This is a business partnership. It doesn't negate the lifestyle. It doesn't negate the tradition or practice. It just focuses on the fact that I'm running a business by God. Help me run this business. Help me architect the future. Help me evolve. Help me know what's right. Help me move forward. They will be the ones who are not only collaborative but visionaries. They will embrace your newest scheme, your newest idea, and might even be the one that pilots that on their operations. And we spend time with them. Men and women who work with their nutritionist, or their agronomist, or their supplier, or their downstream to find better ways to do things to increase the efficiency of operation. They too want value. The value they want is maximize their profit. Maximize how they operate as a business. Show me how it makes sense. Which leads us to our resolute defenders. I think that we have the unfortunate bias of most people saying dairy men and women are stuck. And it's unfair because it's not only untrue, it doesn't actually reflect the resolute defenders. Resolute defenders are good folk. They are doing the right things at the right time to maintain a lifestyle and a practice that has consistently been part of the infrastructure of America. They are important to us. We need to help them see the future. We need to reach to them and talk to them about why innovation is good, how it's going to change, and what it means to them. We won't be able to demand that they change, but as soon as they see their neighbors making the change, as soon as they see others advancing and they know they can do it, they too will move forward. We need them to survive. We need them to succeed. We can't afford, the nation's security cannot afford to see these operations no longer operating. That doesn't mean bad business. It means we need to be patient. It means that we need to meet them where they are, praise them and support them where they lie, and help encourage them to make the changes necessary as the world changes around them. They will push back, and they will not like it. They won't want it to change. But eventually they will recognize that the world is changing, and that they too are going to need to accommodate that change. It might mean allowing for the next generation. It might mean change, but it does mean that they're going to have to account for that. And then we have my favorite group, the Lone Rangers, who are bound by tradition and by God, leave me alone, just let me do what I do. I am confident in who I am ambitious. I will grow because I know how to grow, but I don't need you to help me. These men and women believe that they have been trained in the right way to do things, and they believe that they know when they know what they know in order to know that they need to do something. Which means that we need to meet with them where they are, and we need to stay the course with them, and we need to understand that eventually they will decide for themselves that it is time to consider what the competitive advantage looks like and how we accommodate that in our operation. It also means that they're going to work harder than anyone else, longer than anyone else, and try until their knuckles are bloody before they actually change. And by God, they're going to make it work. Does this feel reasonable? Can you identify men and women that you work with that fall into each of these categories on any one day or over time? We do this not so that we can put people into buckets. We do this to help understand how people are making decisions. We do this to help advise boards, frankly, your senators and your congressmen, legislators at the state level and others, to not look at farming as homogenous, to not judge farmers based on their commodity, to not look at their size as an inhibitor, whether they're too large or too small, but to rather meet them where they are and to understand what they need from us. And this is what they need from us. What they need from us, and there's going to be 5 slides here to help you get a little closer to each of these. What they need from us is to understand who wants to collaborate and who doesn't want to collaborate. I know you've met with people before who don't like to talk, and forcing them to talk makes you uncomfortable and makes them uncomfortable. Collaboration is an important way that some people think. And you can see that those 3 that I've circled there are ones that are most interested in collaboration. By God, Lone Rangers, don't collaborate me. I don't want to talk to you. I know you've had conversations like that, because I've had conversations like that. nearly everybody's future focused, but I want to go to the very bottom because this caught us by surprise. Nearly 100% of the men and women we spoke to when we asked them, what are you motivated by? They said, I'm motivated by mission. Well, what does that mean? It varies. For a resolute defender and a lone ranger, my mission is the health of agriculture. I'm feeding the world. That's my mission. And by God, I'm going to do everything I can to feed the world, even if my milk only goes 15 miles down the road to the local co-op. Our ambitious architects will say, I'm driven by mission as well. I want to advance the industry. I want to make sure that we're the best in the world. I want to make sure that what we're producing is whatever the consumer wants, better than they could ever imagine, making me more money than I could ever imagine, and making sure that the industry is resilient, mission-focused. We can lean into mission-focused. We can lean into creating resiliency in the United States and helping these men and women survive, thrive, and help establish us. What we also know is that growth means different things to different folks. Some are willing to fail, others are not willing to fail. We need to know who's willing to look into that. We also need to know whether or not they think they know what they need to know. Many do not, and we're going to have patience. Many don't think past this year. Others have 5 to 10 year plans. You can see the green, the Lone Ranger will tell you, I've got a 5 to 10 year plan and this is what I'm going to do. To the same degree, your ambitious architects will tell you. Now, what I will tell you is the ambitious architects have it in writing, and the Lone Ranger has it in his pocket, and he'll pull it out and show it to you, and it looks like this. My hands will get me there. My hands will get me there. I know where I'm going to be in 10 years. Is that fair? Do you know someone like that? Calloused hands, get there? Let's talk about attitudes. Let's talk about whether or not I know what I know. Again, these Lone Rangers, they know what they know. They know where they're going and they know what's going on. That isn't bad or good, it's just attitudinal. What we have to understand is how we meet them where they are, and we should meet all of these men and women where they are. We should also make sure that we understand when they're talking what most motivates them. For many men and women, it is about the lifestyle, and we can lean into that lifestyle. We can talk about what it means to not only them locally, in their community, in their church, regionally, but we can broaden it out and say, and you know what? We're making a difference in the world. It's about national security. We have to make the intangible tangible for them. It's not about keeping things the same, but it is about making sure that we know where we meet them. And for many men and women, it is about collaboration. And you can see that it's the ambitious architects and those confident tacticians who are most likely to want to talk about things with you. The stalwarts are going to be the ones that most want to talk to you about things. Understand that if someone doesn't want to talk to you, it doesn't mean that you're not providing value. It just means they need time and space to make the decision. We've got to start treating men and women homogeneously. What we also have to do is understand what partnership means to people. I'm going to drop you all the way to the bottom of the slide, and we're going to make sure you have more information. I can't give you these slides, but we're going to make sure you have this so you understand this more clearly. Let's drop to the bottom and understand what it means to find partners and to have access to resources. Ambitious architects, those businessmen and women, are most oriented towards that access and that partnership. It doesn't mean others are not. It just means that you're going to find more receptive individuals when they start to talk to you in that language. We need to make sure we're treating people differently, because when we're not treated differently, we feel like people are missing out on it. They don't understand us. And we need to do that because what we're going to encounter in the future is an awful lot of change. As much as we saw change in the last 5 years, it's at least our notion that the change that's going to happen over the next 3 to 10 years is going to be pretty darn profound as well. Data and traceability is no longer an option. In fact, for many organizations, it is a necessity. Go back to MVP, they trace it all the way down to the cow. They're tracking the cows, and they're freely sharing that information. Doesn't mean everybody has to do it, but it's not going away. We also have to understand that precision technology is not only going to help us with labor situations, but it's going to help us become more efficient and more effective. How it works on the operation is going to depend on how that operation is willing to take it on. Whether we want to talk about it as climate change or climate cycles, things are different. And we're going to need to understand that that's making a change in the industry. Farms in California are leaving California. It's too damn hot, and there's not enough water. And they're moving here. That's changing the competition as well. It's changing the leadership. It's changing what's happening. And I would tell you that they're not doing it because it's easier to do business here. They're doing it because they can't do business there. And that sucks, because they also have 3- and 4-generation farms, and they've been doing the same thing, but it just doesn't work in the Center Valley of the United States any longer, or in California. You've heard from Pivot Bio. Biotech is something that's going to be important. We also see that most of the men and women who fall into the category of dairy men and women look at genetics as something that is not only tangible, but applicable to them on a daily basis. This is going to continue to be part of the story. And the last part, bringing me all the way back to the beginning, is that what we do in this industry is we sustain our national security through the abundance of food. The challenge is it just food or is it healthy? And what we have right now is a national debate going on that says we need to make sure we're not just producing mass quantities, but we have to make sure that those calories are beneficial and are delivered in a way that can be consumed by human beings without adulterating them. This is a big conversation, and we can't avoid that conversation. The farmers of the future that we just talked about, each of them are going to look at these 5 differently, and they're going to embrace them differently. It's okay. Collectively, we have to get there, which means that what we really need to talk about is the future farm. Now, my team got together, and they said, let's look at what's evolving on the dairy. Let's look at what the pressures are that's happening right now. We don't have all of them, but I want to just say we think that this is a pretty good synopsis of the challenges that are faced by any number of dairies at any number of sizes. And we believe what it means is that producers are generally responding in one of several ways to that. And this is all good and healthy until we look at it through the lens of risk. Can I do it and still maintain the capital I need to operate? Can I do it and not jeopardize the authentic leadership that I've had in the marketplace that says, this is how I operate, and my reputation is based on that, and I don't need someone else telling me how to run my operation? Can we actually do that? Can I actually do this without succumbing to traceability, or am I just going to have to accept that it's part of what's happening? These risks are real, and whether you accept them or not, they're going to change the way our markets work. Whether inputs are available or not are going to matter an awful lot based on the economic challenges we have. And by God, cybersecurity and our ability to insure ourselves against the loss, the damage, the adulteration, or other pieces of that is going to become more and more a part of our conversation. We can't avoid it any longer. That is a real risk. And the last is, going back to the world, we don't control an awful lot of our inputs. The inputs that provide what is necessary to grow the food that your cattle eat, that your cows need to produce the milk that they do. And as the world becomes tighter, as Belt and Road changes, as phosphorus or nitrogen become more challenging to get or more expensive, the entire system changes. We need to be prepared to mitigate those risks. These things that happen in other countries affect us. Those are not really intangible. They are tangible. And then we ask, based on that, based on our supposition, what do we think farmers actually think are the most important risks? And this is what they tell us. This is what you told us. The most important thing is back to that dream. If we lose the next generation, if they don't want it, and we don't make sure they're capable of doing it, if they don't get it, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for the industry? What does that mean for my community? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean? I can't control the supply chain, except I can, so I need to understand this more, and I need help making sure I ensure that supply chain works. I also need the supply chain up and down from me to help me understand why adoption of something is important, why it makes a difference. Not just that I have to, but help me understand why. Because I do want to grow. Going back to that segmentation, there's not a single person in our study that didn't say I want to grow, but they want to grow differently. So we have to be prepared to help them grow the way that they are capable and want to grow. Because this is about legacy. This is about legacy of the men and women that we serve on a regular basis. It's the legacy of the United States. It's how we exert power in the world. This is important. And you, when we talk to you, are telling us that it's not just about not losing the next generation. It's about forfeiting that legacy that we've worked so damn hard for several hundred years to build, to make sure we're as strong as we possibly can be. Now I'm going to transition from that risk into what we think we know. What we think we know is that 5 years ago, people said, meh, sustainable operations, kind of important, but not really important. About 90% said I'm interested, but maybe not really interested. What you can see is that more people are getting more interested in sustainability than environmental activity. So help me make sure I'm sustainable in whatever definition that sustainability looks like. More clearly, if you look at the left-hand side, this is talking about sustainable practices help me be successful. About 2/3 of the operations we spoke to, all commodities, said yes. Actually, 90% said yes. Many of those, about 1 in 4, saying I neither agree or disagree. I'm kind of waiting to see. And when we look at it based on profiles, that's most of the people that are on the center right saying, hey, I just don't know yet. What's more important is what's on the left. Can I be profitable with these things being imposed upon me adopting these or whatever? And the answer is almost 1 in 5 say yes. Not maybe, like the 40% in the center. Nearly 2 in 5 of you and your peers say absolutely. I can be profitable even when these things are asked of me. And it's important for us to hear that because what you see is all you know. And we need to understand that the aperture that the world looks at is bigger than this county, bigger than the state of Wisconsin, bigger than the Midwest. And when we look across the United States, about 2 in 5 operations say, I get it, I want it, and I'm capable of making it work. But it varies. If it's tangible and it deals with my soil health, I get it. If it's intangible and it talks about things like greenhouse gases, I can't see it, I can't control it, it's not my business, don't worry about it. What we're saying is that the farther we get away from the real, the rational, the more men and women say, not so sure that it's a big deal. Until it is a big deal, which is part of our responsibility if you're part of the sustainability movement, if you're working within the policy, we're going to have to make the future real in order to make sure that we don't miss and get caught short. It all comes down to this. Look, we're preparing for the future, and preparing for the future means we've got to understand what's happening at our feet and what's happening over the hill. What's over the hill right now is intangible. We're going to have to, at some point, make it tangible and make sure that it's real. This is my favorite slide, and you hate it the most because you can't read it. And I did that on purpose because I want to call out 3 things on this slide. This is a graph that shows you level of concern. The farther to your right, the more concerned I am. And the higher up, how likely it is to affect me. And the one in the far right-hand corner says costs of energy and fuel. Nearly everybody said super concerned, super likely to affect me. But let's flip the script and go all the way down to the bottom left-hand corner. And what that says there is leveraging partnerships. Not concerned, doesn't affect me. What does that mean? It doesn't mean they're not important. What it means is I already got them, I'm already counting on them, and I need them. Our responsibility in this room, whether you are a producer, a processor, a support element, or someplace else in the industry, is to make sure that we don't lose the momentum on the partnership. Because when we start looking at things like technology, not only are people not really concerned about late adoption, they're also not concerned about early adoption. I don't know what that means. What it means is people don't know what technology is going to do. Most folks need to understand more. It's our job in the industry to make sure we continue to educate the why, not just the how and the what, but why this makes a difference. And the last goes back to sustainability, and we're all over the map when it comes to sustainability. Some are concerned, some aren't concerned, some say it's very likely, some say it's not very likely. Our focus has to be on continuing to educate, continuing to have those conversations, continuing to open apertures, continuing to talk about this. Because, frankly, our supply chain is at risk right now. If we don't fix some of these things, infrastructure, if we don't fix the way we're producing food in some cases, we will lose our competitive advantage. And in losing our competitive advantage, we will have more farms fail. That's not good for anybody. Growth does mean diversifying income and becoming more scalable. Scalable doesn't necessarily mean bigger. It means more efficient and better. It does mean that we're going to have to encourage people, regardless of where they stand today, to adopt more. And this isn't Scott Caine standing up here and trying to rah-rah technology and rah-rah change for the sake of change. I'm just saying, if we're going to mitigate the risk, we're going to have to take into consideration what's happening in the world, what's happening local, what's happening between the ears of our men and women who are producing stuff, what's happening in their hearts, and how we continue to move things forward. And we're going to have to address it holistically. And last, and certainly not least, what we have to do is make all of these real. Not as a scare tactic, but real for the American farmer. Otherwise, we don't have the possibility of continuing to maintain the strength that we need in the United States to feed ourselves and to influence the world. So where do we go from here? The operating environment is changing. We can't not change it. Some will embrace it, some will resist it, some will tell us it's not happening. We need to open the aperture. We need to make the intangible tangible. Just maintaining for any of us is a death sentence. We see it happen all the time. It's not good enough just to be good enough. We've got to continue to evolve, and we've got to make sure that the tension that we feel in the organizations that exist here in this room and in the United States is used for productive, progressive gains, not for conflict and not for zero-sum gain. We as a country cannot afford to have those type of conflicts. What it means is that we are responsible for supporting the dairy industry more than we ever had before. Your call to action is, let's not let them fail. Whoever them are, you, they, whatever. We need to make sure that we provide the right resources at the right time and the right tools, whether it be services, technology, advice, counsel, and frankly, sometimes just a human ear to understand what's going on. You cannot do it alone. The Lone Rangers are going to go out of business if they don't continue to advance. The resolute defenders are going to go out of business if they don't see the advances. We can't afford to let that happen. So, where does that leave us? That leaves us with me, being your military intelligence officer today, asking you to consider that food is national security, asking you to consider that the world is much closer than we think it is, asking you to consider that what is intangible still impacts us. It is our job to turn the intangibles into tangibles, to make sure that those tangibles are real, and to make sure that those things that are real are rational. And so now, what you get to do is try to prove or ask me questions as to whether or not those are real, rational, and actionable. I think we've got mics walking around the room, and I think I'm going to get some help.
Yeah. So, we do have some mics wandering around here. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise a hand, and if we don't see that you got a hand raised, feel free to holler. We got some lights pointed at us. But I will ask Scott, as we're kind of queuing up the audience, going back to one of your last couple of slides, you talked about how kind of that desire for transferring to the next generation is potentially causing wealth generation issues. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So what we understand is that succession planning is hard, and that succession planning doesn't always create a favorable business environment. And in many cases, it causes angst in the family. We've seen far more farms suffer from a poorly planned transition, and as a consequence, actually have the farm broken apart, or worse yet, not sustained forward. And as a consequence, the value that persists in that family farm is lost as that farm changes hands, not to the family, but to others. It's an unfortunate side effect of what we see happening right now without succession planning. Is that fair?
Yeah, and it looks like we got a question back here. If we could just, before you get going, if you could just give us a name and kind of your role in the industry.
Sure. Josh Hush and I work for Cargill. My question is, you talked a little bit about dairies moving out of California to the Midwest, right? Some of those descriptions you said were basically climate related, but I didn't hear you talk a lot about climate change. Can you address that a little bit?
Can I address why I didn't talk about climate change?
Yeah, is that just an example of it, or did you avoid those words for political reasons?
So yes, and yes. Look, we spend a lot of time talking to a lot of organizations about a lot of different things, and there are times when we come and talk exclusively about climate. I indicate that it is important for us to talk about because it is moving agricultural production from portions of the United States to other portions, and it is a real-world thing. We've actually worked with several dairy producers who have, after generations in Central Valley, California, shut the operation, either shipped the cows or sold the cows and started operation again in Iowa, Nebraska, and others. It's happening right now. The pressure that water is having, absent this last year, has made a significant portion of that the case. It is just too hot, the cows are too uncomfortable, and where they are just doesn't work. Now, they could move closer to the coasts, but that's also changing with money and land and other costs. So the answer is, I didn't touch on it because it's a deep conversation. It also is politically sensitive because in some cases what we're talking about is it real or is it perceived? Is that a fair not answer to your question? We can talk about it after. And look, I'll talk to anybody about anything after this. What I hope you feel is that there's a depth of information available and maybe even some opinions. Yes, sir.
Can I just ask one clarity, though? Are you bullish on the Midwest, then? Can I ask that? Because of climate?
So the upper Midwest, yes. Work an awful lot in Kansas. I lived in Kansas for 4 years. I fear for Kansas right now. This wheat year was bad. It's hard. It's going to be even harder since the aquifer is actually showing strain right now. Doesn't look like the aquifer is going to get filled again. So upper Midwest, yes. Where we are, yes. Moving a little farther east, yes. Certainly Canada is going to be a beneficiary. But I think when you take west of the Mississippi and south of, say, Nebraska, things are getting sketchy.
We got time for one more,
Oh,
sir.
man.
Just, listening to your presentation, it seems to me like most dairy producers in this room have a little bit of every one of them.
I think you're talking about the segments. And I started this way and I'll answer your question. You may find yourself in each of those categories, and that's okay. What I'd like to suggest is that in your natural decision-making practices, there is going to be one of those that's more likely to be the way you think. Not by force, but by reaction. By how you were trained, how you live, how you learned, how you believe, where your faith lies. There is going to be a certain disposition. And this is what DISC does, and this is what other behavioral psychologists look at. So the answer is there is one of those that is going to be more likely to be yours than others. But under stress or in a relaxed moment, for sure you could act anywhere across that spectrum. What I'm leaning into is how do I deal with you as an individual in the moment, and I need to listen for those words that says this is where you are. Is that fair?
So I suppose you run into a lot of producers that maybe will never buy a different colored tractor, but they're willing to consider a feed additive. Is that similar to what you're
I think that's very fair. And I think what's even more fair is to make sure that the men and women who are dealing with them don't see them as a yes or a no, see them as binary, but rather see them as someone who is a human being that has different ways of approaching things, and it's not always going to be this way if it's not always valuable for it to be that way.
Very good. Well, in the interest of keeping ourselves on schedule, we're going to go ahead and wrap up there. Please join me in thanking Scott for sharing his thoughts. Scott.